The following program is being brought to you on the Voice America Health and Wellness Channel. For more information about our network and to check our additional show hosts and topics of interest, please visit voiceamericahealth.com. The Voice America Talk Radio Network is the worldwide leader in live Internet talk radio. Visit voiceamerica.com. The views and ideas expressed on the following program are strictly those of the host or guests and do not necessarily reflect the views and ideas held by the Voice America Talk Radio Network, its staff, and management.
Loss in our lives takes on many different forms and can be more than just a physical loss. It goes beyond that to include emotional loss, business loss, and loss of personal health. This is Voices for Healing with Cathy Roberts. Today, Cathy and her guests will help you find out that you are not alone in dealing with loss and grief. There are so many different ways to deal with loss. What works for some may not work for others. Together, let's find the solution that you can use. Here's your host, Cathy Roberts.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to Voices for Healing Talk Radio. I am your host, Cathy Roberts. In my work as a professional counselor and educator in the Washington, D.C. area, I work with people living with and growing in response to all sorts of loss and change. You can learn more about me and my work on my website, cathyroberts.net. And from there, we can connect on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and more. You can also subscribe to Voices for Healing on iTunes and get regular podcast downloads. I want to acknowledge Pathways Magazine for their support of this program. Pathways is a free quarterly journal distributed throughout the Washington, D.C. area. You can pick up a copy at your favorite library or health food store. The summer issue is now available. And for listeners across the nation and around the world, you can read Pathways online at www.pathwaysmagazine.com. Each week, this show features a guest who has expertise in some area of healing loss and finding opportunity. My wish for everyone listening is that you connect with some of what you hear on the shows and be inspired to use challenges to grow and become your best, most authentic self. Today, my guest is Rick Hanson. Hello, Rick, and welcome to Voices for Healing Talk Radio.
Hi, Cathy. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, it's a tremendous pleasure to have you. Let me share with the audience and our listeners more about you. Rick Hanson, PhD, is a neuropsychologist, a senior fellow of the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley, and a New York Times bestselling author. His books include Hardwiring Happiness, Buddha's Brain, Just One Thing, and Mother Nurture. He is the founder of the Wellspring Institute for Neuroscience and Contemplative Wisdom, and he's been an invited speaker at Oxford, Stanford, and Harvard, and taught in meditation centers worldwide. He has several audio programs, and his free Just One Thing newsletter has over 100,000 subscribers. In the hour ahead, we will explore the intersection of neuroscience, psychology, and contemplative practices in such a way that you will be able to understand the importance of these in your life. We will delve into what we're learning about the connections between our brain and mind, how we can use our minds to change our brains for greater peace, compassion, and connection. And you will get solid information as well as an exercise that Rick will share with you that you can use to anchor and hold positive experiences that you have. One of the real significant parts of what Rick talks about is being able to take in and hold the good. Let me share with you some of what Rick wrote in Buddha's Brain as an opening and introduction to our conversation. An awakening mind means an awakening brain. Throughout history, unsung men and women and great teachers alike have cultivated remarkable mental states by generating remarkable brain states. For instance, when experienced Tibetan practitioners go deep into meditation, they produce uncommonly powerful and persuasive gamma brain waves of electrical activity, in which unusually large regions of neural real estate pulse in synchrony at 30 to 80 times a second. Integrating and unifying large territories of the mind, So with a deep bow to the transcendental, we will stay within the frame of Western science and see what modern neuropsychology, informed by contemplative practice, offers in the way of effective methods for experiencing greater happiness, love, and wisdom. These methods will not replace traditional spiritual practices, but understanding how to affect your own brain can be very helpful, especially for people who do not have time for intensive practice, such as the 24/7 grinding and polishing of monastic life. So, Rick, perhaps you could start with telling us how you became interested in this trio that really makes up the center of your work, this trio of neuroscience, psychology, and contemplative practices.
Sure. Well, I think like a lot of people, it started for me in childhood, in which I just had this very strong background sense in many situations that there was a lot of unnecessary unhappiness. In other words, it was nothing horrible, but just lots of unnecessary irritability, worry, hassles between people, or just not appreciating life. And the sense I had as a kid wasn't very verbal or rational or well-developed, but it was very much in the background. So it kind of started my search for what are the true deep causes of happiness. And then that led me through Western psychology. And then early in the mid-'70s, I would say, 1974, I started meditating. I kind of encountered contemplative practice, which seemed to contain a whole bunch of wonderful tools and perspectives. And then starting with my formal training as a psychologist and then a neuropsychologist, over the last, I'd say, 20 years, there's been a real engagement with the nervous system, the underlying hardware, in the black box inside the brain. So the bottom line is, I figure if you think about the intersection of brain science, psychology, and contemplative wisdom, there's pretty good stuff there where those three circles overlap. And it's both interesting and, more than anything, that's especially relevant for our purposes, it's full of practical uses. And I'm looking forward to talking more about that with you.
I am too, and I appreciate your giving us that background grounding of how you came into this beginning really in childhood. And I love that piece of history about you and that. Let's start with the brain and just a little bit about how the brain works in this unhappiness versus happiness kind of continuum that you described as knowing something about even in childhood. Unnecessary unhappiness is what you called it, which I really like that phrase because I connect with that very much.
Yeah.
So share with us a little about the basics of that.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting, actually. I just get excited even though I talk about this all the time. So people listening, okay, you got a nervous system. Purpose of the nervous system is to move information around. The nervous system arose when ancestors of ours, literally 600 million years ago, had grown complicated enough, these multicellular creatures, basically ancient jellyfish, who they'd gotten complicated enough that their sensory systems, that were detecting what was happening around them, and their motor systems that was enabling them to move toward the good stuff or away from the bad stuff, those systems had gotten complicated enough that they needed to communicate with each other. In other words, the sensors needed to tell the motors, the fins or what have you, what was happening, and the fins also needed to tell the sensory systems what they were doing. Okay, thus the beginning of the nervous system, this information processing system. Okay, so here we are today, 600 million years later. The headquarters of the nervous system is in the brain, inside your head, in the 3 pounds of tofu-like tissue inside the coconut. And this brain of ours contains about 1.1 trillion cells, roughly 10% of which are neurons, these little on-off switches. So we got 100 billion neurons, these little cells inside our head, that are connected on average with about 5,000 other neurons, giving us an extraordinarily complex network with 500 trillion little synapses, little nodes, these little junctions between neurons inside your head. Right now, sending information around, trying to make sense out of the sounds that are coming in, from the sounds that I'm making, trying to think about things, hope, dream, and sorrow. All right, that's what's happening. The purpose of this nervous system, in many ways, is to be changed by our experiences, what feel, what we hope, whether we're joyful or depressed, is continually changing the nervous system, literally building structure and changing function. This is what scientists call experience-dependent neuroplasticity. Plasticity just means capacity for change. This means that we have the power to use our minds to stimulate the neural circuits that underlie important factors of happiness, like compassion or resilience, the executive functions, mindfulness, a sense of meaning in life, and so forth, feeling cared about by others. Okay, so when we have those kinds of experiences, that actually changes the structure of the brain. This means that we can stimulate the neural circuits that underlie those wholesome states of mind, thereby strengthening them, giving us the power of what people call self-directed neuroplasticity. So that's kind of the big overarching framework. And then what I'm sure we'll get into is how to actually do it in everyday life, how to actually sustain those experiences that will be useful for you, and by sustaining them, strengthen their neural substrates, if you will, weaving those resources into the fabric of your brain and therefore your life.
Yeah. When you talk about this, I think about when I was in grad school, which wasn't that long ago, about 15 years ago. I remember hearing that at a certain age, like as people aged, they really lost the capacity to change their brain. I remember somebody saying, yeah, if you work with older people, you're probably not going to change very much. And it seems like the information that we've learned in the past 20 years has really shot holes in that. Our brain continues to have this plasticity and be able to change throughout our lifetimes. Is that correct?
That is correct. And it is interesting. It's always been understood that any kind of mental change entails a neural change. Otherwise, we're left with supernatural or transcendental factors. In other words, if a child learns to walk instead of crawl, or later on, learns that 2 + 2 is 4, or a lot later on, learns that life goes a lot better with your partner if you lean toward your partner when she's got a problem, and the problem looks more and more like it's you. All right? So that's learning. Okay? Any kind of learning involves change in the brain. So there was always an understanding of neuroplasticity. The breaking news is the extent of this neuroplasticity and the possibility that throughout the lifespan, my dad's 95 and he is genuinely still learning new things. Or let's say someone is grappling with a mood disorder, ranging from just kind of the blues, dysthymic disorder, if you will, all the way out to depression, or maybe they're grappling with a loss, or they're just dealing with a tough situation right now altogether. If they're doing that, that means, and learning how to do that more and more effectively, the really good news is that you can make fairly dramatic changes in your brain over time, and thus your life. You have to do the work. It's old-fashioned. This is the essence of self-reliance. But if you do the work, you can have confidence that it will bear fruit.
And that's really wonderful for people who are suffering or going through some kind of loss where they've lost their perspective and are feeling low or down or depressed or anxious about something, to have the sense that there actually are things that you can do to help focus your mind and change your brain and create perhaps a different chemicals swimming around in your brain and things like that. So people really can begin to expand their sense of responsibility for what they're capable of.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly right. And that's great news, isn't it? Especially at a time when people may feel kind of helpless or relatively powerless in terms of dealing with conditions or dealing with losses or, just the mood in their body or, in their brain altogether, or just pushed around by events in society, financial difficulty, who knows what, political craziness. It's great to know that from the inside out, there are things you can do yourself to help things get better for yourself.
Yeah, that's what I think is important, and that sense of being gentle with ourselves in the process. A lot of times when something is very fresh and new, people may not be able to do much with it right away, except to feel what's going on and acknowledge it and look for ways to be in it for a little while before there's actually anything that they can do. Do you agree that there's a kind of gentle process that we want to encourage people to have?
Yeah. There's a kind of a joke in therapy world. How many therapists does it take to change a light bulb? Only one, but the light bulb has to want to change. In other words, the beginning of all this is a kind of kindness toward yourself. Both based on principle, that if we're to be benevolent to all beings, that includes the one who wears our name tag. There's a general principle that our greatest duties are to those over whom we have the greatest power. Well, who do you have the most power over? It's your future self. Plus, also, there's a warm-heartedness from the inside out, that you bring to bear to yourself. So, yeah, you need to treat yourself like you matter. But if you make efforts every day, I think about growth curve. In other words, if you're seeing ads for savings accounts, right? What's the biggest part of the ad? It's your interest rate. They tell you what your interest rate is. You want it because that's what they're selling you. The greater the interest rate. We all understand that. The more that our savings account or retirement account, what have you, will grow over time. Well, the same thing is true for a person. What's our growth rate as we go through daily life? Do we learn a little bit over the course of the day? Do we become a little more skillful, a little more capable, a little more competent at the end of the day compared to where we started? That little difference in any given day usually doesn't look like much. But again, it's like the interest rate in your bank account. The difference between, let's say, 6% and 5% may not look like much on any given day, but if you add it up and you compound it over a month or a year or a decade, it makes a big difference. In the same way, if you can just steepen your growth curve a little bit, which is what we're going to talk about here, in terms of neuropsychology of learning, how do you help your brain learn from everyday experiences? How do you grow the good stuff inside yourself? If you get just a little more skillful with that, well, that difference, that extra little bit of skillfulness that we're going to explore won't make much difference any given day, but like that interest rate on your savings account over time, over a month or a year or a decade for sure, it will make a really big difference for you in terms of your course in life. And I find that tremendously hopeful, and it brings us down to responsibility. As Rabbi Hillel wrote a long time ago, if you're not for yourself, who will be? And if not now, when?
Absolutely. You write that in our fast-paced culture, there's an undercurrent of unease a lot of the time, and there are physical and mental consequences that we experience as a result of that ongoing activation of our nervous system. Can you share a little bit about that and what happens there as a way to help us understand what's going on when we are stressed as we begin to move into what we can do differently?
Yeah. One way to understand this is from Robert Sapolsky's wonderful book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. It's a classic. It's a good read. It's a great read, actually. So basically, as our ancestors evolved, in order to get the carrots in life, as it were, and also especially to avoid the sticks, predators and all the rest of that, we evolved this complex neurohormonal system that has a resting state, which is good, where we recover, we repair, we refuel, we conserve resources, we just kind of hang out, And the resting state of the brain and the body feels good. In other words, it feels good to be relatively calm, relatively contented, and relatively connected to other people. It feels good because from a raw survival standpoint, it is good. It's a way to, as I said, conserve resources and pass on genes that pass on genes. Okay. I call that the green zone. That's our resting state. That's the good news. On the other hand, thinking about those zebras in the wild, they're not just sitting there or walking around eating grass, rubbing up against each other all the time. Every so often, whoop, the lions attack. When that happens, these systems fire up in the body. Our resting state is disturbed, and we go into fight or flight mode or freeze mode, all of which, any one of which, would be a disturbance of our resting state. And so when that happens, and it happens today when you're stuck in traffic or irritated or feeling blue or worrying about something or feeling hurt, because the same neurohormonal systems that evolved to help those zebras get away from those charging tigers or our primate and then hominid and then early human ancestors, the same neurohormonal machinery that evolved to help those ancestors survive in really harsh conditions. Let's not forget how harsh those conditions were. Well, those same systems are happening today when you're dealing with an irritating conversation with your partner or trying to get a kid, a struggling, squirming toddler into a car seat, who doesn't really want to go. or you're worried about something, or maybe you're reactivated from your own childhood. Something comes up that just stirs up a trauma history or just other kinds of painful experiences. So when that happens, in the brain, the nervous system lights up with what's called mainly the sympathetic wing of the autonomic nervous system. And so the alarm bell of the brain, the amygdala, sends a signal to the hypothalamus, another little part of the brain, an ancient part of the brain, which signals the pituitary glands to release hormones into the bloodstream. The pituitary gland, singular, is inside the brain. And then those hormones secreted into the bloodstream by the pituitary gland go down to the kidneys, down there in the torso, kind of the trunk of the body and the gut. And the kidneys release various hormones such as adrenaline and cortisol. And then that leads your heart to beat faster, your pupils to dilate so they can gather more light. It also shuts down digestion. You got to conserve resources for fighting or fleeing. And then interestingly, in terms of the brain, cortisol goes back up into the brain where it has a 1-2 punch. It's very relevant for people dealing with stress or really difficult situations. And in the brain, cortisol, the stress hormone, sensitizes the amygdala. It makes this alarm bell more reactive and more intensely reactive. And meanwhile, cortisol overstimulates and gradually kills neurons in a different part of the brain, the hippocampus, which is right next to the amygdala. This matters because the hippocampus puts things in perspective, helps us see the big picture, helps us realize that this is today, not then, this is my boss, this is not my stepfather, this is a small issue with my partner.
Rick, I'm going to have to cut in for just a moment. I'm going to have to cut in. We are at time where we need to take a break. I am sorry to interrupt there. I want to get right back to what you're talking about. We'll have a short break and we'll be right back.
Cathy Roberts is not only an exceptional radio host, she's an exceptional listener and counselor. Cathy appeals to motivated, high-functioning people to help them improve their health and vitality. Cathy can meet you where you are and help you identify what you want. Visit Cathy's website at www.cathyroberts.net or call her at 301-651-0019. Cathy works with both individuals and couples and specializes in grief and depression counseling. Get to know yourself by working with Cathy. Visit cathyroberts.net or call 301-651-0019. Cathy Roberts offers Circle of Voices teleclasses to help you focus your mind, engage your energy, and awaken your inner guide. Through this experiential and interactive series, you will know yourself more and learn to express yourself authentically in your personal life. Visit Cathy's website at cathyroberts.net to find out about this teleclass series, designed to open you to change and engage healing in the fabric of your life. Go to cathyroberts.net or call Cathy at 301-651-0019 for more information.
Your life, your health, your network. You're listening to Voice America Health and Wellness.
You are listening to Voices for Healing with your host, Cathy Roberts. If you have a question or comment for the program, please send an email to Cathy at cathyroberts.net. That's Cathy at cathyroberts.net. Now back to Voices for Healing.
Welcome back to Voices for Healing. I am Cathy Roberts, and my guest today is Rick Hanson. Our topic is Buddha's Brain and Happiness, how focusing your mind can change your brain. Rick and I were just talking about the cycle that stress has on the brain and what happens when we get stressed and get stuck in that cycle of the hormones and connections in our brain going round and round with stress and how hard it is to get out of it. So, Rick, could you pick up there? Thank you.
Oh, sure, definitely. So here we are, right? This system evolved for good reasons to help these, zebras get away from those charging lions. So let's say here we are today, juggling too many emails or being pressured in our workplace setting or hassling with a teenager, the normal stuff of everyday life. Or we're just dealing with, a background inside ourselves of feeling discontent or irritated or, let down. All right. When this happens, these systems in the body do their job, including sending cortisol up into the brain, where it creates a vicious cycle. Stress today makes us, subtly makes the amygdala, the alarm bell of the brain, more reactive and weakens, controls upon it from the hippocampus, which then makes us a little more reactive to stress tomorrow, releasing even more cortisol, as it were, which then continues this sensitization process. So one thing to appreciate is that our ordinary experiences of being upset, irritated, stressed, and so forth really do change the brain over time. So one thing that's happened for me is I've gotten a lot more, being that light bulb who wants to change, for myself now and not waiting for others. I've gotten a lot more careful about what I casually indulge in the back of my mind, that kind of grumbling case about other people or, criticizing myself or worrying about something past the point that's useful, beating myself up and so on. That's not good for us. The flip side of it, though, is that we can reverse this process over time. We can gradually look increasingly for the good facts all around us in everyday life and not just miss them, or if we notice them, not having any kind of an experience as a result. We can kind of move through our day with more of what I call a happiness habit. And also, in particular, we can look for those specific resource experiences, those key experiences, which, especially when internalized, when turned into resources inside, will grow the good stuff inside ourselves, like resilience or confidence, feeling cared about, compassion, self-compassion, what have you, that will help us be happier and also more functional and have more inside to offer to others.
I want to highlight some of what you just said there because I think it's really significant for people to slow down and really hear. And part of that is it's important to control what we bring into our minds and what we think about, so that if we find ourselves watching the news or getting into something that is upsetting us, we have the choice of turning that off and turning our attention to something else that can decrease that kind of stressfulness that we're feeling. I think that's one thing important to note.
Yeah. The William James, the godfather in American psychology, said about a century ago, or wrote, the education of attention would be the education par excellence. That's because in terms of experience-dependent neuroplasticity, it happens in particular for what's in the field of focused attention. So, attention's a little bit like a vacuum cleaner. What we rest it upon sucks into the brain. That's a cautionary tale. Think of all the weird, unhelpful stuff that we rest attention on, grumbling worries about life, bad news that we can't do anything about, our case against other people, our grievances with other people. That's not so good for us. And so mindfulness training, by the way, is very foundational in terms of getting control over where your attention rests, and in a sense, getting control over arguably the most, important property that we have, which is our own attention.
Yeah. And this is something that we can focus on and look for good around us and change the focus of our attention so that our incoming and what we're having our brain soak in is something more positive. I was watching one of your videos on YouTube, and I so related to this, and I want to share it with people because people might be hearing us and saying, yeah, but that can be really hard to do. And I think of that description that you gave of in a given day, you can have 5 positive experiences, 4 neutral, 1, and 1 that is hurtful in some kind of way. And that's the one that goes round and round in your brain and keeps you up at night. And there's that bit of a negativity bias that we have. And I want people to know something about that so that they can be easier on themselves when they find themselves in that sort of thinking.
Oh, that's a very good point. So here we have the structure building process, right? And if you want to really grow, again, resources inside, making it real, you want to be a little calmer. You want to feel a little more grateful. You want to be more compassionate. You want to be more patient. You want to, let's say, be more motivated to exercise or take your vitamins or maintain your sobriety or, act in a calmer, more, restrained adult way, as it were, let's say with the kids. Okay. You want to grow this inside yourself. If you're not having these useful experiences, you can't grow them. And even if you have useful experiences that are the basis for growing resources, psychological, mental resources inside yourself, which means changing neural structure or function. If you're simply having those experiences without internalizing them, without installing them, which we're going to talk about, I'm sure, they're momentarily pleasant, but they're kind of wasted on the brain. Meanwhile, we've got a brain that's biased toward turning negative experiences into negative neural structure. In effect, negative states really become negative traits very easily. The brain is very good at learning from bad experiences, but relatively bad at learning from good experiences, even though learning from good experiences is the primary way to grow resources inside yourself. Why is this? The so-called negativity bias of the brain, which is what scientists call it, evolved because our ancestors needed to both get carrots, as it were, and avoid sticks. Sticks like predators, natural hazards, aggression inside or between their primate bands, carrots like food, mating opportunities, and so forth. Well, the difference between a carrot and a stick is this. If you fail to get a carrot today, you'll have a chance at one tomorrow. But if you fail to avoid that stick today, that predator, that aggression, whatever, bam, no more carrots forever. So these days we've got a bias in the brain that continually scans for bad news, isolates down upon it with tunnel vision when it finds it, missing the big picture. Third, reacts overly intensely to the bad news, to the negative information. For example, if you play two sounds for people that are equally loud, one is pleasant, one is unpleasant, the brain will react more to the unpleasant one. And then fourth, this whole package is fast-tracked into emotional memory. Once burned, twice shy. Never forget. So we learn faster from pain than from pleasure. Negative information about others is more memorable than positive information, thus attack ads in politics. Think about a relationship. 10 things happen in the day. 9 are positive, 1's negative. What's the one we think about when we're falling asleep? We're very vulnerable to developing a sense of helplessness, which is really true for people grappling with tough conditions. It's so easy for mammals, and including humans, to acquire just a sense of whatever, despair, defeat, nothing I could do. And it takes many times as many counter experiences to slowly acquire the feeling again of being more like a hammer and less like a nail as you go through life. So this is the negativity bias, and I think it's helpful for people to appreciate that it's not their fault that this is the case. It's how we evolved. It's designed to help us survive. Maybe the negativity bias is useful even today under certain kinds of tough conditions. But for most people, dealing especially in the more developed parts of the world with many unfortunate, obviously tragic, sometimes exceptions, but for most people, the negativity bias today functions as a kind of well-intended universal learning disability because we've got a brain designed for peak performance in Stone Age conditions. That means that when you tilt toward the good, notice when you deliberately, I don't believe in positive thinking. I believe in realistic thinking, seeing the whole mosaic of reality. But we've got a brain that's biased toward over-focusing on the negative tiles and missing, overlooking, underestimating, even denying the positive tiles, as it were, in the mosaic of reality. So for me, if you tilt toward really looking for those good facts in everyday life and then letting yourself have an authentic, proportionate, appropriate experience as a result, and if you also particularly look for opportunities to create those useful experiences inside yourself, those key resource experiences that will make the most difference for you, if you do this, if you tilt toward the positive in this way, you just correct for the negativity bias and level the playing field.
This is where I think mindfulness can be so helpful. If we actually are noticing our experience and aware of what our inner state is and whether or not we're in that reactive mode versus responsive mode, we can really know a little bit more about what we might do to shift it. I think that's a significant piece there about why mindfulness is so important.
Yeah, that's exactly right. If you're not there for your own experiences, you can't learn from them, and you cannot heighten their installation in your brain.
Yes. Can you share with us a simple act or exercise that we might do to calm our system down and balance ourselves when we find we are in that reactive place?
Sure. So, for example, exhaling. Exhaling activates the parasympathetic wing of the nervous system and is soothing. and calming. So if you deliberately take 2 breaths, or 5 or 10, in which you make the exhalation about twice as long as the inhalation, that will naturally calm and settle you down. The other thing you can do that I think is really interesting is to notice that in this second, you're actually all right now. In your body, you're basically all right. Once in a while, we're not actually all right. Maybe there's not enough air, we're drowning, or maybe, there's a shark chewing on our leg, or something terrible has happened. Okay, in the moment, you may not be all right. But most of the time, you're actually all right. And registering that experience and listening to your body, its signals, like the calls of a night watchman, all is well, is actually profoundly useful for people. So in this moment, people listening can open to registering, if it's true, and it's almost always true, that you're basically all right in your body right now. There's enough air to breathe. Your heart is beating. You're not in overwhelming pain. You can afford to relax a little bit in terms of anxiety, registering that you're all right now. And I'd say a third, and maybe I'll just finish on this one, practice that people can do is to look for legitimate opportunities to feel cared about. Cared about is sort of on a range. It runs from being included to a sense of belonging, or it could be a sense of being seen, or that people want to understand you, or feeling cared about could be a sense of being appreciated or respected, or it could be a sense of being liked or even loved. Any one of those will be good in its own right and will help calm anxiety. My kitty cat outside wants to know that he's cared about, so I'm going to let him in here. All right. So those three are good. And then when you have those experiences, exhaling or noticing you're all right or feeling cared about, don't just, don't focus on the idea of it. Try to have it be an embodied experience. Activate, as it were, the experience. And then when you're having that experience, help your brain learn from it by installing it, by staying with it 5, 10, 20 seconds in a row so it really sinks in.
Yes. In addition to calming ourselves down, we have about 1 minute before our next break. You also speak to the importance of warming ourselves up, that is, calling upon our inner strengths and developing perseverance and so forth. Can you share a way or two that people might do that? And if we need to, we have about less than a minute, so we may need to break in the middle. But
yeah, very briefly, if I'm going into a tough situation, I've got to assert myself, I might call up the kind of body memory of rock climbing. There are other examples of this. The idea is that it's okay to deliberately call upon resources inside yourself to create experiences, get good things going so you can deal with tough conditions.
Excellent. As we come up on our break, please stay with us, listeners. You will, for more about how you can stimulate and strengthen your brain to create more calm, greater confidence, more fulfilling relationships, and more focus. We will be right back with Rick Hanson.
Cathy Roberts offers Circle of Voices teleclasses to help you focus your mind, engage your energy, and awaken your inner guide. Through this experiential and interactive series, you will know yourself more and learn to express yourself authentically in your personal life. Visit Cathy's website at cathyroberts.net to find out about this teleclass series, designed to open you to change and engage healing in the fabric of your life. Go to cathyroberts.net or call Cathy at 301-651-0019 for more information. Cathy Roberts is not only an exceptional radio host, she's an exceptional listener and counselor. Cathy appeals to motivated, high-functioning people to help them improve their health and vitality. Cathy can meet you where you are and help you identify what you want. Visit Cathy's website at www.cathyroberts.net or call her at 301-651-0019. Cathy works with both individuals and couples and specializes in grief and depression counseling. Get to know yourself by working with Cathy. Visit cathyroberts.net or call 301-651-0019.
Opinions, options, answers. You're listening to Voice America Health and Wellness.
You are listening to Voices for Healing with your host, Cathy Roberts. If you have a question or comment for the program, please send an email to Cathy at CathyRoberts.net. That's Cathy at CathyRoberts.net. Now back to Voices for Healing.
Welcome back, listeners, to Voices for Healing. This is Cathy Roberts. My guest today is Rick Hanson. We're talking about Buddha's brain and happiness. Before we dive into the meat of our next segment, I want Rick to be able to say a few words to you about what programs or events he has coming up and how you can reach him.
Oh, thanks. The best way is through my website, Rick Hanson, SON.net, rickhanson.net. Tons of freely offered resources are there that people can use for their own purposes and also for professional purposes. And then one interesting thing is starting in September, I'm going to be launching this online, extremely rich with resources program called the Foundations of Wellbeing. It'll include video teachings from me every month. Over the course of a year, there'll be 12 major themes. We'll start with befriending yourself, ending with service, and we'll be applying the basic ideas of the fundamentals of inner strengths. Second, growing resources inside yourself. Third, regulating yourself more effectively. And fourth, relating to others more effectively. Those give us the 4 quarters of a 12-month period. And then we'll be applying those to the 3 fundamental needs that everybody has for safety, satisfaction, and connection to deepen a growing sense inside of peace, contentment, and love that's unconditional, the basis upon which, you can deal with the challenges in your life. And so that program will be great, and you can find out more about it on my website, rickhanson.net.
Sounds fabulous, the Foundations of Wellbeing. I hope people will check that out and take a look at that. Making friends with yourself is one of the most wonderful things I think we can learn to do.
Yeah.
Rick, you talk a lot about taking in the good, and I'd like for you to share that with our listeners as well as the HEAL process. I read about that in the Psychotherapy Networker magazine. I use it for myself all the time now, and I use it with clients who really enjoy it. So share those things with us in this final segment of our show.
Oh, sure. So it's what I've kind of alluded to repeatedly here. It's how to grow the good stuff inside yourself. So let's suppose, take an example. Let's suppose a person wants to feel more cared about, more loved, more appreciated by others, and therefore more of a sense of worth inside, and fill that hole inside your heart over time. Okay, how do you actually do it? Well, the thousands of studies on humans and other animals show that the neuropsychology of learning is a 2-stage process. It essentially, moves from information, including experiences, such as feeling cared about, held in short-term memory buffers, which then must be encoded into neural structure, must be transferred to long-term storage. Gives you this 2-step process. Or to put it a different kind of way, there's a movement from state to trait. Momentary experiences or states that have been activated in the mind-brain system, which then must be installed into neural structure and turned into traits. Okay, how do you do it? It really boils down to 4 words. Have it, enjoy it. In other words, look for those opportunities in everyday life to have positive, useful experiences. You often, because you're already having it. There you are at the deli and you're just shooting the breeze with people making your sandwich. You feel cared about in a little way. Or your cat crawls in your lap for your morning meditation, which is pretty common in my life. Or, you bring up a memory, let's say, of your grandmother who loved you dearly, and, maybe there's a sweet memory of making oatmeal raisins cookies with her or something like that. Whatever it is, there you are. You're having this experience of feeling cared about. You have it. Okay, now move into installation so it's not, wasted on your brain by enriching the experience, staying with it, 5, 10, 20 seconds straight, opening to it in your body, and then also absorbing it, intending and sensing that this experience really sink into you. Well, so far we have, enrich, and absorb. It's a little bit like a fire. You light the fire so you have the fire burning, and then you protect the fire and add logs to it so you enrich the flame, and then you absorb the warmth into yourself. You really let this sweet experience sink in. Even if it's just a 1 or a 2 on the 10-point intensity scale, which is the way it is with most of our useful experiences, it's still real. And then if you want to, there's the optional step. You can link the positive experience you're having with some negative material off to the side of your mind that the positive material is the natural antidote for. So So there you are, let's say, having an experience of being cared about today, and off in the distance of your awareness are feelings not being so cared about, maybe from a job situation recently or a relationship that was tough, or your own childhood material. And since neurons that fire together wire together, that positive material will gradually go into and soothe and calm and ease that negative material. So it gives us the acronym HEAL, HEAL, have, enrich, absorb, and optional step. Link, and in other words, this is the essence of growth curve. This is the essence of positive neuroplasticity, the essence of self-directed neuroplasticity, using your everyday life experiences skillfully to change your brain for the better gradually over time.
And this is something that people can do on a regular basis. They can do it daily, once a day, once a week, with some sort of regularity, because it is the process of repeating this practice again and again and again, that taking in the good, anchoring it in, linking it to something that is more painful if that's what you want to do with it, but mainly the taking in the good of it and finding a way to anchor it in that can really make lasting changes in our brain over time.
Yes, exactly right.
Yeah. And I think that offers so much hope for people who are experiencing loss or grief or depression and struggling in it.
Oh, that's great. I completely agree. It means that everyday life is this fantastic opportunity for teaching. In other words, you can just, as you go through your everyday life, you can grow as a result, which is fantastic if you think about it.
That's what I love, and it's part of why I love doing this program. I love the idea that we take whatever is going on in our lives outside of us, no matter how, what we might feel about it, or no matter how difficult it might be to feel, and use that as a vehicle, as a portal to grow and expand ourselves and become, from my perspective, over time, more loving, more caring, more compassionate. I think it's one of the most wonderful opportunities available to us, even though it doesn't feel good at the time.
Yeah. No, that's beautifully said. Absolutely true.
Now, do you think that by doing these practices, the taking in the good, the heal, over time, does the focus that we do in doing that make our brains more open to seeing the good, recognizing the good, taking in the good on new occasions?
It really does. In other words, if you repeatedly look for the good, you're developing a habit that is regulated by a part of the brain called the cingulate cortex, the anterior cingulate cortex. In other words, you're establishing basically a goal or a response bias or rather a search strategy, better way to put it, that becomes a habit. In other words, you start scanning for good facts around you. For me right now, it's become very much a habit. I'm having a nice conversation with you. I'm looking out the window. I see jasmine outside my window. I know it will smell good when I step outside. It looks pretty right now. I'm just scanning for good news. I'm not making it up. It's realistic thinking, right? Or I'm seeing good in other people. I'm trying to see the being behind the eyes, or I'm recognizing progress in small ways. So if you change your search strategies, as it were, you see different things, and then also you train your brain. You get faster and better at internalizing, in terms of emotional memory, your useful positive experiences. So yeah, much as the brain can be sensitized toward the bad, it can also be sensitized toward the good.
And that, again, offers so much hope and I think is really inspiring. Can you speak to the process of dealing with loss and grief and how what we're talking about might work in those areas when people are going through a major loss or some change that they're grieving?
Yeah, this is where, for me, it's useful to think about the three basic ways to engage your own mind. And they're just three. The first way is to be with what's there. Feel the feelings, experience the experience. Be mindful of what is happening for you. You're not trying to change it. You're opening to it, hopefully with some sense of acceptance, hopefully with a big sense of spacious awareness in which this particular painful, difficult experience is arising. Maybe you're investigating down to what, are the different aspects of this experience, the thoughts that make it up, the emotions, the body sensations, the desires, what have you. And then maybe you're also investigating down to the deeper, softer, more vulnerable, often younger layers of it. Okay, but you're not trying to change it. You're just riding out the storm. And tons of research shows that stance of kind of acceptance and awareness and spaciousness and just being with it and tolerating this difficult experience, letting it flow, letting it be present in your mind is a very, very good thing to do in terms of mental health. Okay. Second step, though, is to release the negative, where you grieve the loss, for example, or you exhale to release tension from your body, or you challenge a negative thought that's just not rational or it's overstated, or maybe you release some kind of unwholesome desire. You let go of the negative or you decrease the negative. And then in the third step, or the third way to engage the mind, you grow the positive. You want to develop resources inside yourself. In effect, if your mind were like a garden, you could witness the garden, pull weeds, and plant flowers. All are important. I think witnessing the garden is most fundamental because it's your last resort, and it's also where people go in their own psychological or spiritual practice, typically over time. You get to a place where more and more you're just kind of being in the moment, in the flow of life, grounded in a felt sense of the nature of things, rather than caught up with any single content. But meanwhile, it really works to pull those weeds and plant those flowers. So for me, that gives us a kind of framework. In the beginning, if you're dealing with loss, it would be phony or inauthentic to try to get rid of the feelings immediately, or, even more slowly than immediately. And it would be inappropriate to try to grow something positive inside your mind. But there's a natural rhythm. I think of it as the Goldilocks point, where not too tall, not too short, not too hot, not too cold, the just right place, where it feels like, okay, in general, or today, or just now, enough. I need to shift out of feeling this pain, bearing this, and I need to move into a letting go. I need to help this reduce. I need to, for example, pull my mind away from what I'm experiencing, or I need to let it drain out of my body. I need to reduce the negative. And then there's also a natural rhythm where it feels like, okay, I've done enough of that. I've created enough of a space in my mind. I've let go of the negative. Now it's time to let in the positive, especially the positive that's an alternative to the negative. So, for example, if I've had a loss, after I go through the first and the second steps here, then when it's time to replace what I've released with some positive alternative, I might look for not those things to be grateful for or glad about in life, not to try to make up for or cover over this terrible loss I've had. Nothing could do that, but to also see the good in life, to have realistic thinking, to see the whole mosaic of reality. Or I might deliberately look for experiences where I do feel fed by life, or I do feel given to or rewarded, even as I've had this loss. So I've got less over there, but I can open to more, let's say, over here. Again, not out of disloyalty to the loved ones that are no longer with me, let's say, or not in any way, shape, or form to try to minimize some terrible thing that's happened, some disability that I've developed, some illness I'm grappling with, but to also, alongside those difficulties, grow resources inside myself to reduce my own suffering, to increase my own coping, to continue to experience well-being and to support my own effectiveness, and also to grow things inside myself so I have, things to offer to other people. So in sum, that's how I would think about this. And I think being aware of all three ways to engage your experience, letting be, letting go, and letting in, gives you kind of framework as well as a roadmap so that you can see where you are in the process and what might be the next step for you.
Beautifully said. Rick, we're coming up to the end of our program already, and I'm glad that we ended with what we did about when we're going through a difficult time and we have a lot of feeling about it, we can let it be, find ways to let it go, and then let in the new. Reminds me of some of Elizabeth Kubler's Ross's work about replacing that finding ways to renew your energy, put your energy into something new. Well, this hour has passed so quickly. Thank you, Rick Hanson, for joining me today. I'm really glad that you were here with me. Yes. I hope that you all, our listeners, will join us next week. My guest, Ginny Robertson, creator of On Purpose Networking for Women and much more, will be with us sharing her tips on how you can get out of your own way and create the life you want. Until then, this is Cathy Roberts saying transform yourself, embrace vitality.
Thank you for listening to Voices for Healing. Please join Cathy Roberts again next Monday morning at 8 a.m. Pacific Time, 11 a.m. Eastern Time on the Voice America Health and Wellness Channel. We wish you the best recovery from your loss, and we'll talk again next week.
Thanks again for listening to the preceding program, brought to you on the Voice America Health and Wellness Channel. For more information about our network and to check out additional show hosts and topics of interest, please visit voiceamericahealth.com. The Voice America Talk Radio Network is the worldwide leader in live Internet talk radio. Visit voiceamerica.com. The views and ideas expressed on the preceding program are strictly those of the host or guests and do not necessarily reflect the views and ideas held by the Voice America Talk Radio Network, its staff, and management.